Cherie Barber. I'm a professional renovator and an official ambassador for the National Asbestos Awareness Campaign.
If you haven't met Betty, she's a real trooper. She's been travelling around the country, educating Australians about the dangers of asbestos and where they might find it in their own homes. And although she's covered a lot of ground, she can't get to all of you. So we've taken the Betty truck into the digital world. And this is your virtual Betty tour.
Today I want to take you on a tour of this Renovators delight so I can show you some typical places where you can expect to find asbestos. Now, I've been renovating older homes for more than 20 years now, and let me tell you, I've seen every example of asbestos. That's because any property that is renovated or built prior to 1987 is likely to contain asbestos. It can be across weatherboard, brick and clad homes too. Sometimes asbestos is highly visible, but sometimes it's not. It can be lurking behind your wall tiles, your ceilings, your walls, and under your floor coverings too.
While you always need to be hyper careful where asbestos is concerned and never ever do any DIY renovating if you suspect you're dealing with asbestos, the good news is that the mere presence of asbestos isn't reason for panic, as long as it's in good condition and you leave it alone. It's only when you disturb asbestos and release its lethal fibres into the air that it can become a serious health threat. Before we start the tour, let's look at the two main types of asbestos that were used in Australian homes so you know what you're dealing with. There are a few different types of asbestos, but they exist in two forms, friable and non-friable. The ones of most concern are called friable, and they contain up to 100% asbestos. They are typically soft and crumbly, so much more likely to release those tiny toxic fibres into the air. This type of loose asbestos was mainly used in industrial and commercial settings for fireproofing, soundproofing and insulation, which was sometimes used in the ceiling space of homes. Way more common in Australian homes, and thankfully far less dangerous, is non-friable or bonded asbestos, and there are a broad range of these products. These are made from a bonding compound such as cement mixed with a small amount of asbestos, typically less than 15%. They're rigid, so the asbestos fibres are tightly bound in the product and not normally released into the air unless badly deteriorated or disturbed. Other types of bonded asbestos products include the backing and adhesives of wall and floor tiles.
If you've heard of fibro, asbestos cement or A.S.E.A sheeting, these were some of the common names used for bonded asbestos. Asbestos typically came in sheet form, and those sheets can be either flat or corrugated, and they were used everywhere, as roofing, as wall linings inside houses. In fact, some houses were built entirely out of fibro asbestos. It was very popular for building extensions to existing houses, even brick and weatherboard homes too. In the decades following World War II, asbestos was the material of choice. It was cheap, it was highly versatile, and everyone loved it. But then the dangerous health effects of asbestos became known in the 1980s, where it gradually began to be phased out ahead of a total ban in 2003. This house was built prior to 1987, so it's likely to contain asbestos sheeting in a lot of the places you'd typically expect. I'm planning a cosmetic renovation to this property. Before that renovation has started, I've had an asbestos inspection and condition report done. This is really important. If you're planning a renovation, it's definitely wise to get this report done, because what that report will tell you is if asbestos is located in the property, its condition, whether it's dangerous, and this is really important to let your tradespeople know this as well.
Luckily, this inspection didn't turn up any hazardous or high-risk asbestos, which is great news. There was no friable asbestos detected. However, it did find several telltale signs of bonded asbestos. So let's just run through some of those, starting from the outside.
That's asbestos sheeting up in the eaves. The dead giveaway is the batten that joins the two sheets together. It's very common for houses of this age to contain asbestos sheeting in the eaves. The good news is it's not damaged, it's not broken. Unless you go meddling with it, it poses very little risk.
This kind of flat sheeting was also used as exterior cladding on houses, you know, the ones we call fibro shacks, as roofing, and also for outside dunnies, dog kennels, sheds and carports. Asbestos was also used in moulded products, such as guttering, decorative profiles, mouldings and pipe flues.
Now, it's really important not to confuse asbestos sheeting with modern fibre sheeting, which is completely safe and contains absolutely no asbestos.
The age of your home is your best indicator of whether the property is likely to contain asbestos. If it was built after 1987, it will almost definitely contain safe, modern fibre sheeting.
This is a brick house, which means there's no asbestos present in the brick. However, it's still likely to have asbestos present in the property. In days gone by, it was very common for people to install cladding straight over the top of asbestos sheeting. One example is fake brick cladding that contains asbestos. So before you start any renovation, make sure you know what your cladding material is. That way you know how to deal with it properly. Now this will take you by surprise. Asbestos was commonly used in your electrical switchboards. It was used to insulate the area and sometimes used in your old fuses too. Now this backing board here, it's made of bonded asbestos. So as long as it's not broken, it's not damaged, it's perfectly fine. It can stay as is. Can you believe it? One area that people never think they'll find asbestos is in their old concrete paths and driveways. In past years, what they did is they actually buried the asbestos into their concrete driveways and paths just to act as a filler. So be really careful if you're jackhammering those up. Now I'm walking around my carport garage area and I'm immediately noticing the corrugated roof sheeting. That is asbestos.
Many roofs of old houses still have this corrugated sheeting. It was also widely used for fences. If it's corroded or starting to deteriorate, like this one, you need to get professional asbestos removalists in to remove it so the loose fibres don't become airborne. The most important thing with asbestos products is to remember not to water blast it, as this can turn it into friable asbestos and cause massive damage. These fibres are so tiny they're invisible to the naked eye, but once inhaled, they lodge in your lungs and wreak havoc. It can take decades for diseases like asbestosis, lung cancer and mesothelioma to develop long after the deadly exposure to asbestos.
That's why it's so important for renovators and homeowners to be really careful when dealing with asbestos. And see these weatherboard cladding on the garage? This contains asbestos in this property. So the only way you can be sure if your cladding has asbestos is to get a sample, send it off to a certified lab for testing, and that way you know what you're dealing with. I can see some of these weatherboards at the moment are showing signs of deterioration, so it's definitely something I need to keep an eye on for the coming months and years. One of the most important things you can do with any asbestos building material is actually to seal it and paint it. What this does, it stops further deterioration and it actually seals in the fibres. But whatever you do, do not sand it back. Let's take a look on the inside of the property and see what we find there. As you can see, the internals of this house are in really original condition. That carpet is screaming 70s, as is the wallpaper. A lot of people used to wallpaper straight over the top of asbestos sheeting. Now, you don't have to remove the asbestos walls. All you have to do is make sure that your tradespeople are aware that asbestos is there. Trades like painters, wallpaper removers, they will know how to deal with it very diligently. If you're ripping up your old carpets, one thing you need to be very careful about is your carpet underlay. Luckily in this property, I have no asbestos underlay, but it's definitely something you need to be very mindful of. You'll often find asbestos ceilings that look like this. One of the telltale signs is the joining strip connecting the two sheets together. And those ceiling sheets, they can be asbestos cement sheeting, asbestos insulating board, they can be asbestos ceiling tiles, or even the sprayed insulation. You know those ugly popcorn ceilings that you tend to see in a lot of apartments?
Asbestos was used as insulation in wood heaters and hearths, even under old cast iron fireplaces like this one, and as loose fill insulation in the roof cavity in homes in the ACT and some in New South Wales. Thankfully, that's not common, and the New South Wales and ACT governments have taken steps to deal with all homes affected by this loose insulation product called Mr. Fluffy.
It's very typical for bathrooms built before 1987 to contain asbestos sheeting. Normally where you'll find it in the bathroom is in the ceilings, your walls, and under your floor tiles. In fact, a lot of the glue and the backing boards used on your wall and floor tiles can contain asbestos as well.
Asbestos products were very commonly used in wet areas of older homes, such as bathrooms, kitchens, and laundries. If you have a really old bathroom, particularly in original condition, you're probably going to come across asbestos. There was a product called Tilux that came in a wall sheeting. It quite often had a marble finish, and it was the height of fashion back in its day, but that contains asbestos.
So before you start any major bathroom renovation, get the professionals in, identify if it's there, and then if you do have it, bring the licensed asbestos professionals in to remove it. Now in the kitchen, you can clearly see we've got asbestos sheeting in the walls. It's fair to say that that asbestos sheeting runs the whole length of the wall, which means the kitchen cabinets and tile splashback are backing onto that. Now, if I wasn't renovating this kitchen, I could leave that asbestos sheeting there and it wouldn't pose any problem to anyone. But if I was planning on ripping out the kitchen, installing a brand new kitchen, I'd need to very carefully remove all of the fixtures and fittings, making sure that I don't yank nails and things out of that asbestos sheeting. Always make sure you use a good quality mask, and then you get the licensed asbestos removers in to remove the wall sheeting. Everything's been done properly. In your old kitchens, you might also find asbestos in your vinyl floor tiles or as the backing to your vinyl flooring. So whatever you do, don't go crazy with a floor scraper. From time to time, on a more rare note, you might also find asbestos in your splashback, so be really careful.
Quite often there can be a lot of visual clues that indicate whether or not your home has asbestos, as we've seen today. But the only way to be 100% sure whether you're dealing with asbestos is to send a sample off for lab testing. Or the golden rule is, if you think it might be asbestos, treat it as if it is, and take all the necessary precautions. So, while I hope this video reassures you that asbestos in the home is not something to immediately fly into a panic about, there is a chilling statistic I'd like to leave with you. In the past, Australians diagnosed with malignant mesothelioma have primarily been men exposed to asbestos through work-related exposure, either tradies or those who worked in the asbestos mines. Today, the main risk group are home renovators. They are the third wave of asbestos victims. And with more and more women doing DIY and home renovations, they have to be particularly careful. With asbestos diseases like mesothelioma, there is no cure. A recent study found that 60.5% of DIY renovators reported being exposed to asbestos during home renovations. 58% of those people cut asbestos, the most common activity resulting in asbestos exposure.
I'm very passionate about educating as many people as I possibly can about asbestos so that less people fall victim to it. But why don't you hear from the other ambassadors as well, and I'll come back to you shortly.
I absolutely love renovating, and I love that others renovate too. I actually say your modern day renovator is the old hunter and gatherer. We go to the hardware store, we find a little shack and we do it up. It's our little adventure.
The great Australian dream is to own your own home, and I guess lots of young people buy a fairly cheap home and they don't have much money. They're going to have to do it up themselves.
If you're working on an old home, it's really important to recognise that your home might contain asbestos.
If you even suspect you might have asbestos in your home and you're about to work with it, don't take any chances. This is you and your family's lives at stake.
Get informed.
Know what to look for.
And if you have any doubts,
check with the pros.
If you find asbestos in your home, remember this life-saving advice. Don't cut it,
drill it,
drop it,
sand it,
saw it,
scrape it,
scrub it,
dismantle it,
tip it,
water blast it,
demolish it,
and whatever you do,
don't dump it.
See www.asbestosawareness.com.au for comprehensive tips and information about asbestos and renovating. You'll find a new online database where you can identify the sorts of products to look for, the locations of where asbestos might be found, and learn how to manage and dispose of asbestos safely. Knowledge is power, so be sure to check out the database so you're aware of what to look for.
and remember, don't play renovation roulette. It's not worth the risk.